Hey y'all, welcome to What Could Go Wrong Live. Happy Friday. I'm hanging out with my guy Mark, and we're going to talk about growth mindset, which is one of my very favorite topics, and then yours too, right? I mean, you talk about it all the
Absolutely.
time. And
Absolutely.
pretty much what could go wrong is slang for growth mindset. So it worked out perfectly. And I got to hang out on your show. I don't know, I guess it's been a couple months now.
Yeah, it's definitely been months. It was definitely in 2020 when we did that. So it's been more than a few months. It was last year. It was mid-pandemic, when everybody, it was like the gold rush to LinkedIn. Everybody was showing up and producing content. It was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and so it was great. I'm glad that we had got to connect. We did my show, the DMGB conversation, which stands for Doesn't Matter, Get Better, which kind of fits into who we are and what we do and what I'm about on a daily basis.
Yeah. So, okay, tell us about yourself then. Go for it.
Sure. My name is Marc Nudelberg. I'm the president of On the Ball Ventures, and we are a coaching agency. We help individuals and organizations get 1% better daily, as simple as I can put it. We focus on people, we focus on process, and we focus on doing the little things and the little behavioral changes, both in mindset and in your actual daily activity that can increase revenue, that can increase productivity, and that can make you a better organization and individual.
I love all of that because I'm super aligned with all of that, right? That was how we kind of connected in the first place. Because I do a lot of that in the education world. And it's just my favorite. And you have a background hanging in the education ish, right?
I do, yeah. I gave football educations. I spent 10 years as a college football coach and went across all different levels of the uh, college education world. So I started at Florida State, where I graduated from, and started my coaching career there, and then went to the University of Cincinnati, then went to the University of Florida, then the University of Nevada in Reno, not in Las Vegas, and then to Lafayette College. So
Or
big
like one
schools,
or two.
small schools. Yeah. and yeah, and so seeing the marriage between athletics and academics at the college level and figuring out how to help student athletes not only be successful on the field but be successful in the classroom, and being an educator myself, right? It was my job on a daily basis to coach my kids and educate my kids on what their jobs were within the football team and how to be successful in those things. So it was really, it was an unbelievable education for myself on how to connect with young people, how to teach young people, and how to get development out of individuals.
Um, those are like all my favorite words. So just
Yeah.
consistently use all my favorite words. Okay, so I guess we'll start at the basics. First, actually, I don't know who Bobby Bowden is, but I feel like
Bowden. Oh, wow.
Bowden. So
So
sorry.
Bobby
See,
Bowden is a coaching legend. He is the guy who founded the Florida State football program and really put it on the map. He had unbelievable success in the 90s and then even in 2000, and is a legend there. He's got a statue. The field is named after him. Like, he is up there with the all-time greats of coaching. I started my my career underneath his tutelage, and then when we transitioned as an organization to Coach Fisher being the head coach, I stayed on for 3 more years.
see, I knew all that.
Can
I
we
knew
shout
all
out
this.
to the Schwer, who's a fan of Papa Nudelberg? Shout out to my dad, Steve Nudelberg. So if you guys don't catch us, we do a daily show called the Nudelberg Daily Huddle. We're live on LinkedIn from 8 to 8:30. And shout out to MFSB Live himself, Gabriel. Good to see you. I also did Gabriel's show way back when during the pandemic. So glad to see everybody
Yeah,
here today.
his show's awesome. Um, these are some of my favorite people. Look, William, okay, I don't know everything. Okay, we all have to have a say. Now I know it's Bowden, not Bowden. Wait, which one is it? It's
Bowden, you
Bowden.
got
See,
it. Bowden,
I knew that.
Bowden.
I'm learning something new every day. That's all. That's what growth mindset is, right? A little bit
A
more,
thousand
1%.
percent.
Totally. Okay, so let's start at the basics then. I'd love to hear from you. What would you describe growth mindset as?
So growth mindset is embodying the fact that you don't know everything, and that there are new things to learn, and there's new ways to improve on a daily basis. Because I have worked in industries, in college athletics, and in the corporate world, and in business, where leaders tend to think that because they've gotten to where they are, the world never changes anymore. And what they did to get there is the thing that will keep them there. And there's
Right.
no reason to ever do anything new.
Yeah.
And as we all know, that's not necessarily how you create sustained success.
It's never necessarily how you create space. Not once,
Right,
not ever. I mean, I
right.
use kind of the same concept as there is no mountaintop, right? Which can be, sad when you're hearing it for the first time. Like, you're saying that I never arrive, I'm never done. And the answer is no. But it's more
It's a,
fun that way.
and when you find the people who embrace that, and actually, when you find the joy in the journey, and you really enjoy, like the feeling I get when I've learned something new and feel like I've mastered a new craft, that feeling has to be better than what it feels like to feel like I've arrived and there's no place left to go.
Yeah, I mean, you're done. Where's the dopamine after that? You just hit the top and then that's it. Then what do you do for the rest of your
Exactly.
life?
Exactly. Exactly.
So, what if that's a growth mindset? Then what's a fixed mindset?
Fixed mindset is believing that you know everything there is to know, and that there's no room for any improvement. And if you've ever reached a place where there's no room for improvement, then you might as well pack up shop and move on, because there's no point in continuing to do whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, and I've also in education we've heard it described as like I'm no good at math, I'll never be good at math.
Right.
And that's a fixed mindset. I'm not great at math. I'm also not great at football. Okay. But maybe one day, if I hang out with Mark long enough, I could be this much better. Like, I learned
So
something today.
I got off of a coaching call right before this, and the person that I was coaching is a leader within their organization, and they were talking about how one of their employees has a far better relationship and opens up to somebody else in the organization more than them, and that's the way it will always be. And I
Mm-hmm,
said,
mm-hmm.
well, why is that the way it will always be? And they said, well, that's because that's who they are. They don't say those things. And I said, no, no, no. You
Yeah.
just said they do that. They have that behavior. They just have it with somebody else and not you. So what do you need to do in order to be able to have that kind of relationship? If you say that that's the way it will always be, then that's the way it will always be. If
Mm-hmm.
you look at it as, well, no, 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 they have that relationship with somebody else. How do I get that relationship with them? Then it becomes about, well, what I need to do and not what they need to do.
Which is always a lot easier to control. I find that it can be very challenging to try and control what the other person is doing, and far easier to say, what do I need to change to change this?
Exactly.
Because, manipulation can only work so far, right? It's not quite sustainable.
Exactly.
So, what do you find yourself saying most often? Like when you're on your coaching calls and you're talking
Oh,
about kind of the same things, like what is it that you find yourself repeating all the time?
that's a really good question, because my coaching clients are very diverse.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that I coach leaders on the most is to stop telling and start asking. So they'll be like, well, I need this person to do this thing, so I'm going to tell them to do that. And my number one piece of advice is, take that statement and make a question out of it. Can you turn what you're trying to teach somebody into a question, in order for them to be able to figure out what they need to do in order to be successful? Because telling people things does not work. It might work for a minute, it might work for a quick change, but if you're looking for long lasting effects and development, people have to own the change themselves. So identifying gaps is great, but until the ownership of that gap moves to the person whose gap it is, you'll never be able to fill that for them. Telling them how to fill it doesn't work. Getting them to own how to fill it and understand how to fill it is a completely different process. And so I think helping people understand that they need to ask questions in order to pass the ownership is something that I spend a lot of time talking about.
Oh yeah. And I have similar conversations, and we call it, I actually was just on a call earlier today talking about the ego of the educator, right? So there's this shift between educator-centric learning or education to student-centric learning. And it's kind of the same thing. Instead of us telling them what they need to do, how you need to do it, what you need to learn, this is exactly the framework you need to fit in. Now it's coming alongside them, this co-constructivism approach, and saying, what would it look like if we did? Or what is it that we should do to solve this problem? It's kind of the same thing. You're putting aside the ego of the educator of, I know everything, I know all the answers to that. And you're saying, I'm going to come alongside you and let's find out the solution together. And then suddenly you have this autonomy building in the student, and then they're solving problems and they need you less, which is our goal, right? Leaders,
Exactly.
would be to kind of be needed less and less.
1,000%. I'm always telling people that they should be coaching themselves out of their job.
Right.
Like,
totally.
I should get to a point, and that's how our engagements work with people, is we don't sign 4-year contracts. We sign 90-day contracts.
Yeah.
My goal is to, in 90 days, you look at me and be like, I don't need you anymore. Mm-hmm. Yes, I did my job then, right? But we should assess it after 90 days because maybe there's still some development that needs to happen. Maybe there's some growth that continues that it still needs to happen. But if we've knocked it out of the park and in 90 days you feel like you don't need me anymore, then I've done my job, and I'm happy to part ways after that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I worked with a coach and his statement was all, I'm ready for the day where you fire me. This is my whole goal is for you to fire me. And I remember the day that I was like, I don't think we need to renew it. And I felt really like, I hate to tell you this, but I really don't think we need to renew it. And he's like, yes, that's exactly what I need to.
Yep.
So I got to fire him and it was perfect. And he was all excited about it. It was a whole new world for me. But I think I read this quote the other day that said, the best teams are where you can't spot the leader. And I love that concept. And so I talk about this concept of having a round team. And so it's kind of, instead of a hierarchical team, you're having a round team where you're serving the central mission and everyone builds out the layers from them. And it's a huge concept I talk about all the time in education, because the students are the center and then everyone just builds out around them, because we're not serving the person at the top, let's say the principal. We're not serving the principal, we're serving the student. So break down the pyramid and put us in a circle. And so it's all about how are we all working collaboratively to serve that person in the middle. And what I find is you can't present that concept without a growth mindset, because it's breaking the traditional, it's breaking the norm. Right. So, I mean, how would you say growth mindset fits into the structure of your team?
So that's really, really well put. And I think if you looked at it as a circle, I'd look at it more of a solar system than a true circle, where everybody is on the same ring around whatever the center mission is. That's not, in my opinion, that's not necessarily how it works. Right. Because if I broke it down in a school system, the principal would be the outermost ring, because they're the farthest away from the kids, yet they still have a direct impact. There's still a gravitational pull to the kids, but they don't have the direct contact as the closest ring, who would be the teachers who have daily interactions with them. So I love the idea of looking at it as a circle. I think everybody needs to have clear and concise understanding of what their job is and how their job or how their planet fits into that center of the solar system. Because if everybody doesn't understand that direct line to the center, then you're going to lose the people in the understanding of why it's so important for them to do what they do. Building organizations, building teams, the first thing you have to do is have a purpose defined enough to where everybody can understand it, but broad enough to where it can encompass all of the different sectors that go into it, and have everybody tied into, I know my job is important because it directly affects this thing that we're all trying to do together.
Yeah, and that's what the structure is. Like in team handbooks that I work on and coaching stuff, the student is the center, and then directly outside the student is the teachers, the educators, and then you might have assistant directors and then principals and then whatever, because by the time the student in the middle, the families are so cushioned by all of these layers of people that, I mean, it's so hard to create a negative impact. I mean, so that was one of the biggest changes that happened in the school I directed most recently, we tore down the hierarchy and changed it to a circle and just gave it a central mission. And then everybody knew that they were supported because the teachers are supported by the layer outside of them, and then the outside of them, and then outside of them. And so the layers of support was, I found, what was most helpful, because we can all have a central focus, but if you're not experiencing support, then
and it works inversely, I think, because it's important for the people on the outside of the rings to understand, where is my point of influence?
right.
As a principal, my point of influence, I'm protecting the students, but my direct point of influence is that next ring inside of me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my direct point of influence is the next ring inside of me. And that's the way we accomplish things, is we're going to move this center focus of students and make them successful. But the way I'm going to do it is by affecting all of the rings inside of me and making sure that the center point is protected by me first, not by the student, not by the teachers, but by me first.
Yeah. And that was a challenge for me, because I came out of the classroom and then, worked in all different levels of administration. And then until I was finally running a school, and I could no longer have contact with all 240 students. It just wasn't going to happen. And at some point, I couldn't even have contact with all 75 teachers. All I could do was have contact with my 4 administrative team. And so I had to trust this process, this layered circle, right? To know, like you were saying, I can impact these people who impact these people who impact these people, because I'm going to do a much better job of supporting 4 people than I am going to be of supporting 75 teachers and 240 students. Am I directly responsible for all of that? And that was a huge mindset shift.
And like I know, in most organizations, the people that continue to get moved to the outer rings aren't necessarily the right people to be moved to the outer rings. They're just the people that have either been in it the longest or have been so good at with the ring that they were in that they're like, yeah, we have to move them to the outer ring because they're so good at doing what they're doing, which then creates people who are worried about the most inner ring or 2 rings inside of them, instead of being focused on the direct ring right inside of them. And that is where you get leaders that are focused on not the development of the next best or the people right underneath them, but you have principals that are only worried about the students. So then your teacher development, your administrative development, all of the things that are so important to this cell that you've created, right? It's like a living organism when you look at it like that, where the nucleus is the students. The rest of the cell is suffering because the outermost layer is only worried about the nucleus and nothing that's happening in between those layers.
Yeah. And I had a conversation, I think it was last week, with Elaine, and we initially talked about social emotional learning for the students and who is responsible for supporting SEL in the classroom. And that conversation led to, well, if the educators are responsible for supporting SEL in the classroom, who's responsible for modeling that for the educators? And we got into this same conversation, is we have to be feeding into the people who we're asking to feed into the main source, which is the student. And without that support. And so that's why this whole concept, but I think if you don't have a growth mindset, if someone walks in, like if you walk into an organization and say, hey, we're going to tear down your entire hierarchy, we're going to change it to a circle, and this is why it's going to be great. I mean, what's the traditional response you might get from that kind of statement?
Just the crazy eyes, like what?
Panic.
Yeah, like what? Panic. Like what? No, absolutely not. Like, please leave. Like it's the world that we live in is such an interesting place, because I'm a millennial, I guess. I'm like a Gen X, maybe. I don't know. I was born in '86.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm like right in the middle of like, the millennial, everybody gets a trophy, and this participation ideology. And then the older, my parents, who were raised on the do it because I said so, respect authority, and just because I'm older than you means I know more than you.
Yeah.
I didn't get an iPhone until I was a freshman in college, right? Facebook was still a .edu only entrance when I was in college. So I've seen the world transform at a rapid pace. And I think the biggest difference is the access to information. So seeing the old guard kind of some try to keep up and understand where it's going and what they need to do in order to be successful still as an organization or as a leader or just as somebody who is influencing people around them, how to leverage those tools and how to keep the principles of what's made people successful for centuries, but modernize it in a way where you're able to do it more efficiently, more effectively, and pull in some of the new understandings about the way people function and the humanization of everybody to
Oh
be
yeah,
successful is difficult. It's a difficult tightrope to walk with all these different
definitely.
organizations.
Yeah, it's definitely, and I think that is why this whole what could go wrong thing that I live by is, very much that, because if we're not going into it saying what could go wrong, right? Only fun things could happen. We'll definitely learn something from it. It'll be fine, right? Then I feel like the alternative to that is saying I know a better way, which I feel like if we knew a better way, we would have done a better way by now.
Correct. 1,000%. And I think so. I'm a huge preacher of process, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think having a documented process, being disciplined to your process is very, very important to being successful. But if you are not constantly and continually evaluating that process to figure out how to make it better and how to improve it and to figure out whether or not it still fits the current, the goal in what you're trying to accomplish, then it will become outdated and you
Yeah.
will eventually get to a point where it's no longer serving the purpose that you did. So, for me, I love to come in and look at what people are doing. And, they say, well, here's our process and here's what we do. And I say, well, before you tell me any of that, what's the goal? What are you guys trying to
Right,
accomplish?
right, right, right. Yeah.
Right?
Work
Let's
backwards.
define that first. And now let's say, okay, well, in order for us to do that really well, what are the things we need to do? Bang, bang, bang. Here are the things we need to be great at. Awesome. And so now we work it backwards. And then I say, okay, well, here's the things that you said you need to give me to be successful. Look at how this matches up to your current process. Not very good. It's not,
No.
we're speaking two different languages here. Let's figure out a way to merge these so that it's not a complete overhaul, so that you're not trying to train an entire organization of people on doing new things, but let's figure out a way to move your current process to this process that we've defined together as what's going to make you successful in order to be able to help and create change.
Yeah. And to create change, the leadership has to go into that with a growth mindset. Because if they're going in with a fixed, then, like you were saying, everything breaks. So I was recently working with an organization and I was doing stakeholder interviews to kind of figure out the same thing. Like, here's what we're perceiving as the problem. Here's where we want to go with it, but we're not really sure with boots on the ground. And so had those conversations. And where we're going from that is now to say, okay, we suspect that our job outline is this. But when we talked to the people who were doing the things, we found that it was actually this. And now we have to go back and adjust the job outline to meet what's actually happening. And I feel like that has to happen almost annually. I mean, because it's shifting all the time. When I was running the school, even with, we only had 3 or 4 varying positions, but every year we had to come back and say, here's what we say that you're supposed to be doing. What are you actually doing? And how does it
Right.
compare to this? And are we changing it to meet that? Because it
And
should be
why?
changing every year. Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it just an idea that you have, or is it something that's based on data? Is it something that has been proven to work somewhere else, even if it's not within your own industry? Maybe the philosophy and the principle fits what you're trying to do, so you're able to take it from somebody else. That was always a big thing for me in coaching. Is everybody looks at what the best people are doing and say, okay, we need to do that. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
would do that. I would look at them. I would break it down. I'd study it and do my best to understand it. But I wouldn't just adopt it. I would say, does it fit who we are? Right? Does
Right.
this fit the kind of players we have? Does this fit into our system and our philosophy of what we believe and what we're already doing? Just because it works for somebody else doesn't mean that it needs to work for you. There
Right.
can be maybe a variation of it. There can be just a piece of it that fits for you, or maybe it doesn't fit at all. And that's perfectly okay as long as what you're doing is continuing to work and help you be successful.
Yeah, and it should be changing, and you should be comparing it because, especially in education setting, we're serving students who are changing every year. I mean, the students are never static. It's highly dynamic, even throughout the course of the year. So if you haven't changed anything in a year, 2 years, 3 years, then I guarantee you the students you're serving have changed. So the
Exactly.
processes you're using to serve them should have also changed. I think it
So
was, no, go ahead.
I had a conversation with somebody else that I was coaching, and they were like, our process is super outdated, and it needs to be revisited. And I said, okay, great. I said, well, why? Tell me why you think it's outdated. Give me a specific instance and where you're seeing it not work anymore. And they were like, oh no, I can't do that. They were like, I was just saying, it seems outdated. And I said, well, what makes you say that then? And they're like, well, when we pulled up the document, it was dated 2007. And I was like, well, that doesn't make it outdated. Just because you created it in 2007 doesn't mean that it's not still good now, as
Right,
long
yeah.
as you've continued to look at it and say, yeah, this is great. This is still working. It
Mm-hmm.
still fits our philosophy. It's still serving our purpose. Fantastic. No
Yeah,
need to change it.
right.
So you have to know why you're changing. Just
Mm-hmm.
changing just to change doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it has to be mission centric all the time. I mean, so really having a clear understanding of what that mission is what's going to be a driving factor for all that change. Otherwise, you're just creating havoc by changing something all the time and you're just confusing
Right.
people. Growth
Right.
mindset or not, people will get confused.
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
But I think I had a conversation, I don't even know, time all runs together with Matt Barnes, who works in education. And he was saying, if the school that if your child goes to a school that looks like the school that you went to, then, it's wrong. And
Right.
that was I mean, I can't feel like he's wrong because if we're doing things exactly the same way we were doing them 20, 30, however many years ago, is it still accurate to the students that we're serving now? And I'd like to say no.
Probably not. Probably not. But so it's interesting because I think fundamentals tend not to change. The
Mm-hmm.
fundamentals of what makes people successful, the fundamentals of teaching probably didn't change, but how you went about applying those fundamentals
Right.
had to have changed.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think if the organization and the system and the process is rooted in the right fundamentals and just hasn't kept up with the times, it might not be completely broken, right? The building might still be okay. The
Yeah.
school
Yeah.
might still look good. They might be operating at an entirely different pace than they did when you were there 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But, you have to understand that the fundamentals are what's really important. And then how you adapt those fundamentals are what make people successful over a long period of time.
Right. I mean, the principles, the fundamentals are the same. It's the practices that shift. I mean, the way
Right.
that we are teaching and the way that we're doing it should be very different than the way
Should
that it was
be.
happening before. Should be being the key word there. I mean,
Should be.
the student has changed, but so has research. I mean, what we know now compared to what we knew before has changed dramatically as well. So to think that nothing inside of the practices has changed along with the data that we now have would be a problem.
A major problem. A major problem.
So, okay, so tell me, I want to hear more about growth mindset inside of football because, as you know, I'm a
Oof.
huge football person, right? I know all the things. And I talk about it all the time inside of education. We talk about organizations, but what does that mean inside of like an actual athletic team?
So it's all data driven. And what's amazing is that the hierarchy that you talk about that should be broken has not been broken.
Mm,
And even though there's been this massive influx of data and technology, the people who are making decisions about process change or structural change are very reluctant to adopt and continue to evolve. So it's actually very archaic. Like,
mm,
I want you to understand that, like, when you build a game plan for a football game, you do it by watching the film. You watch the actual game tape of other teams, you break them up into situations, you find tendencies, and then you build your own strategy to attack those tendencies. Traditionally, that had to be done through actual film. You actually had to splice the different pieces of film, tape them together, watch them, tally what you saw, and it took an
That sounds
agonizing amount
awful.
of time to do that. Well, in today's world, there's technology that has merged Excel, applications with the digital video that you're able to input data and sort and split and get percentages far faster than you ever could before. Yet people still spend the same amount of time doing all of the things, even though it could be done so much faster. And so the growth mindset really struggles in that industry because everybody thinks that what they've done to be successful is what will always keep them successful, and don't change it if it's not broken. And that's not necessarily true. Just because it's not broken doesn't mean that it needs to be modernized or changed or adapted. And so it was a real struggle for me. And so a lot of my time in football was hard because if you were the youngest guy in the room, you better keep your mouth shut, because just because you had a good idea doesn't mean that you knew anything. The oldest guys in the room were the ones who were going to make decisions and were going to be the ones who talked. So, being able to navigate that world and having an entrepreneurship mindset and thinking like what we're doing is dumb. Like this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing it this way? But not having that fall on deaf ears and not being able to make the changes. It was a difficult decade of my life, but it was so great because I had the opportunity to learn so much about teaching and developing.
Yeah. I mean, I like just because it's not burning doesn't mean it's not broken.
Right.
I think
there you go.
There's a differentiator there, right? Like it may not be on fire, but it could be a little broken. There could still be some things that need to be fixed. But I mean, my world is I'm usually brought into things that are on fire because I work better that way. They're like, hey, everything is burning. Can you please, build a plane while flying the plane and then also fix this plane that's on fire all at the same time, ready, set, go? And I'm like, absolutely. I'm 100% in on that because that's really my jam. All right, William.
Can we? Yeah,
Yeah.
I love this question. Thank you for asking this, William. So I think that analytics are very, very important in how we make decisions, but there is a merge of taking data analytics and human decision making to find the best outcomes. I think we have shifted to allowing AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to start to make decisions, and that's dangerous. I think there is something that can't be quantified in data, which is experience, which is understanding, which is gut instinct, which when you marry really good instincts and experience with data analytics, you find almost perfection. You really find excellence. And so the people that are balking at analytics and won't take the data and only relying on experience will get passed by. The people that are only relying on analytics will end up getting themselves into trouble because they're not going to see some of the pitfalls. But the people that do a great job of merging both of those things are going to, and this is how I coach salespeople, is when you look at the sales world right now, and for those of you that are on LinkedIn, everybody's getting hammered by data-driven B2B lead or lead generation businesses that are just leveraging all the data that's out there to just throw blind pitches at people. That data is super valuable if you can train a human on how to use that data to connect to people. And that's what we spend our time teaching when we're talking about, how we develop sales teams, is leveraging data to make really good human decisions to drive connections, which then uncover opportunity for people.
And I think that could be a similar conversation with technology and education, because there's, you're either all in saying, yes, we need all the technology in education. Technology should be the driver of education. or we need no technology in education. And I think I'm of the mindset of technology is a tool. We use it inside of
Right.
education, but it should not be the driver for what education is. And I think that is similar to your AI
Because it's
conversation.
humans. It's humans. It'd be one thing if it's just about like digital marketing, fine. You can make as many data decisions as you want to make because all you're doing is trying to find the right person to see and hear that thing. You're not asking them to do something, right? If you're going to ask somebody to move, if you're a leader, if you're a salesperson, if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, if you're an influencer, you are trying to affect people's behavior. And if you need a behavioral change, then you need a human to do that. There has to
Mm-hmm.
be a human element to it. And so then you really have to do a great job of understanding the analytics and the data and how to use that to your advantage as a human.
Oh yeah. I mean, this whole everything needs to be humanized concept. We're talking about humanizing education, humanizing the sale process, humanizing all these things. You can't do that without humans involved. That becomes
Correct.
a whole different problem. Based
Correct.
on that very small word, you need that there. So, okay, so
Exactly.
if you were to take one of your favorite principles that you use in coaching or in football or in your business coaching type things, what would you take and implement into traditional education? What would you put in the traditional education model if you were to try and say, I get like one chance to move it forward? What would that look like?
That's a really, really, really good question. If there was one thing that I would put into education, I think it would be to move away from the factory structure of teaching. I
Mm-hmm.
think I was smart enough to figure out how the system works. So I worked the system to get the paper and
Right,
didn't
right.
really learn while I was in college.
Yeah.
Like I would get syllabuses and I'd see how many points I needed to pass the class. As soon as I got that many points in the class, I was done with it, you know,
Right.
and I was passionate about football and I was passionate about working and there's no room for that in school.
Yeah.
School is so systemized that it doesn't, it's stifling almost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important to be creative and it's so important to be forward thinking and it's so important to learn the foundation and philosophies of things because what you learn in American history or in science could apply directly to business, but you don't learn in that way. You learn that it
Yeah.
only fits inside of this lens and this bubble. So I think taking the barriers out and making it more of a circle, right?
Yeah.
And instead of having all of these defined subjects, maybe there's no subjects.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you learn everything together intertwined and learn more of a timeline than a specific thing. You know, like what
Yeah.
if I learned about the Roman Empire at the same time that I learned about the literature that came out of that time and the mathematics that came out of that time, and I learned everything as more of a here's a glimpse into this time frame and here's all the things you need to know from that time and learned about the evolution of the world that way as opposed to learning specific subjects.
Right. To make it more interdisciplinary instead of this
Yeah,
segregated
there you
approach, I
go.
think is a
That's a
huge thing.
great way to sum up that entire statement in one word. Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I mean, so my daughter, my oldest, we're actually going to do an interview with her on here in a couple weeks because she's 11. She builds her own
Yep.
education model. And for like right now, she takes no specific math class. She does not have a math curriculum. She's in a junior entrepreneurship course. And so inside of that, she's having to build business plans and build budgets and models and whatever. And so she's using all of these things these math concepts, but she's using them in practice instead of
Yes.
siloed in this piece over here. So
Yes.
suddenly multiplication becomes much more interesting when you're multiplying to find out your profit than it does
Yes.
when you're going for, a grade on test. And so what if we took this inquiry-based learning and we built it in an interdisciplinary way instead of segregating it out and all those other things? And then it would be a
And
beautiful world.
it really would. And I think you would you would push humanity, and I'm trying not to be like super philosophical, but like I think you would push the evolution of humans so much farther, so much faster, because you would teach people all of the things they needed to do around the thing they were passionate about. And if that
Oh
passion
yeah.
changed from the time that you were 6 year old to when you're 12, it doesn't matter, because you've learned the fundamentals of what you needed to know, and you'd figure out how to apply those things that you've learned to your new passion. And you'd have all of these people working on things they're passionate about and being creative and being innovative and challenging what they knew in order to try to make it better. How do you lose there?
You don't. I mean, and that's what is happening with my girls' education specifically, because I can't control other people's. And then what we're seeing as this shift in this alternative education mindset is how are we educating? How are we, let's see, pursuing the interest in learning rather than giving them the education that we find is correct? And
Right.
that's the difference. It's inquiry led, it's passion based. Like my youngest is 9. She does the same thing. She builds her own education model. And one week she's like, I want to do all of this and I want to do it around dogs. And I'm like, great, let's do science experiments about dogs. Let's do whatever. Here we go. And the next week she's like, no, forget dogs. I'm going to do rocks now. And I'm like, perfect, let's do that. And she's
Yep.
moving forward with the basics, but she's interested in what she's doing and it changes it. And so, an interesting quote that I heard a friend of mine say is that the future of education is that we don't know the future. And that seems to reason that as educators, instead of, like you had said earlier, the biggest shift that we have now is the access to information. So we are
Right.
no longer standing at the front of the classroom saying, whatever you want to know, you have to come through us to get it. We are the holder
Yep.
of all the information. That's no longer accurate because they can get it on their phone and suddenly they have all the answers, or semi answers, mostly answers, right? So instead
Or
of
somebody
being
else's answer, but they
somebody
have
else's
a answer.
answer, they have a answer. They don't need you for whatever answer they've got, right? So
Right.
instead of standing at the front of the classroom and saying, I am the end all be all, the ego of the educator, you have to come through me. Now you're saying, how can I help you filter this information that you're receiving to find what's quality, what is sustainable, what works, how does that work, why doesn't that work? You're asking quality questions.
Mm.
And suddenly you get a whole different student, someone who's learning how to ask quality questions and solve problems and has a growth mindset, instead of saying, I have to rely on the educator to get what I need.
And you would encourage them to pull in all of the answers you can find. I want to know them all. And I'm
Oh,
actually
yeah.
challenge you to find them all, because it's your job to figure out which one is true, or which one works the best, or which one makes the most sense. And you would create a behavior of looking for all of the different perspectives before you decided on one, which, for those of you who have seen Social Dilemma, or understand the problems that algorithms have created, you would fix that on your own. You wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
asking Facebook to fix their algorithm. The human would, because the
Right.
human would know that whatever I hear, I'll take it, but it's not the only thing I'm going to hear. I'm going to go look
Yeah.
for another answer. I'm going to go look for as many answers as I can find in order to figure out what I think is the right answer. And then you solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, then you're teaching people to ask quality questions.
Yep.
And I was not raised that way. I was raised, this is the answer, this is what it looks like, this is how you do it. There's one way to do it. And if you don't
Right.
do it that way, then you fail and die and everything burns.
Yep.
Which
It's
turns
exactly
out is
correct.
not necessarily the
No,
answer,
it's not
right?
correct at
So
all.
what if we took that mindset, flipped it on its head, called it what could go wrong, and shot that out into all of our learners? What a different climate we would have.
So, and I want to kind of relate this to where we are. We live in the United States. I know not everybody who's watching this might be in the United States, but this is what I find so unbelievable about the Declaration of Independence, about the Constitution and its amendments, is that 300 years ago, these men were able to create a document, a living document, that, while far from perfect, has been able to survive for this long and continue to evolve. The forward
Mm-hmm.
thinking that it takes to create something like that. I know there's plenty wrong with it, and continues to be wrong with it, that isn't fixed. Systemic racism and all of the
Right, right.
problems. But when you look at the 14th Amendment, and for those of you who haven't watched the Netflix series 14, or amend is the name of it, and it's about the 14th Amendment. It's an unbelievable history of what that amendment has meant to history and how it's evolved and changed and stood for so many different pillars of equality and change that was written 200 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Like,
It's
it was
crazy.
mind-blowing to me, And so if we're able to think that way 200 years ago, but we got so comfortable in our system, in our civilization, that we
Mm-hmm.
stopped challenging what we think and how we think it, shame on us.
Yeah.
Right. And it's our job to build a generation of people that will challenge what we talk about, what we say, what we hear, and challenge it at every corner. Because if they do, then they'll get back to the original thing that built this country.
Right. Yeah, I think now what I'm teaching my kids and what I taught when I was an educator was there is a way to respectfully challenge an authority, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to be disrespectful about it, but you can respectfully challenge an authority and ask questions. And that's an important skill. That's an important value because I want my kids to be able to respectfully challenge and ask questions. But that's not how I was raised, right? It's kind of like, shh.
If
I said so.
if you are an educator, if you are a leader, or forget about it, if you're just somebody who doesn't understand why you do something, that's a major, major problem in today's world.
Oh
Because
yeah.
the number one question that everybody should ask all the time is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we doing this? If
Yeah,
you
be a
can
2-year-old.
clearly
Why,
explain to
why?
me, if you can clearly explain to me why something is being done and it makes sense to the overall purpose of whatever it is that we've decided we want to do together, I'm in. But
Yeah.
as soon as you can't tell me why, I'm not doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
neither is anybody else in the generations after me, because
Yeah.
they're not going to do things that don't make sense to them. And if
Yeah.
you don't like that, you are going to get passed by as the world continues to evolve with them, not us.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like prove it. Like this is the
Yeah.
education that I need. Prove it. Why? Like how has that
Why?
served the people before me? Prove that this is the education that I need because if I'm looking backwards, it does not feel like it has served them as well as you're saying that it'll serve me. So tell me why. And I think that's huge. And that's what is propelling this alternative education concept and movement. That's why schools like the ones my daughters are in live, is because people everywhere are saying, why? Like that doesn't
Why?
make any sense. That doesn't, why? Like prove that that was bringing you value. You having a
Exactly.
$60,000 student loan for a piece of paper that you're not even using, does that bring you value or stress? I'm like, I mean, don't ask questions.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
but I love all of that, and you do this all the time. So tell us where we can find you, like where we can find your dad, who is also awesome, and like where
Yeah,
do we
so you can find both myself and my dad on our show, 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock Eastern time, Monday through Friday. We're there 8 to 8:30, and we are talking all things pop culture, sales, leadership. We are looking to deliver some energy to people to help them get their day started in the right way, and then give them a piece of actionable advice that they can apply to their lives to get 1% better. So you can find us there on our show. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me. Constantly looking to connect with other influencers, other educators, other people in the world who just have an interesting story that we can share stories and learn from each other and help each other be successful as we go.
Yeah. And um we are I lost my whole train of thought. It's like ready, set, sentence, squirrel, which is
I love
how
it.
I roll. It's totally fine.
What could go
So
wrong?
I have nothing. It's fine. So later today, I'll be on Snark Squad with some of my friends. We're going to be snarky and ridiculous. So end your Friday out that way if you're looking for something to do on your Friday. Next week, What Could Go Wrong happens all over again. And that's always exciting because something does go wrong. Actually, I don't think anything went wrong, Mark. You were here right before we started. You were like, nothing went
Ready to
wrong.
go? Yeah, this was awesome. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come on your show, be a part of your audience, and I appreciate what you do so much. I really enjoy your content. So keep it up, and thank you.
Yeah. So Restream sponsored this. They're really awesome. They let me stream on all of my different platforms at one time, which is a bonus because obviously I lose my train of thought too quickly and could never manage all of that. So thank you, Restream. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I hope you have an awesome Friday, an awesome weekend, and we will see you next time.